tonight. Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow at ORF, Ashok Sajanar, former ambassador, and Raymond Vickery, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Trade Department. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on ET Now. Let me come to you first, Mr. Sajanar. Now, when President Trump says that Russia holds the cards because it has a lot of territory, is this the president's way of stepping pressure on Russia to be a fair negotiator and cede some of those territories? What really explains Donald Trump's recent remarks?
No, I think, I would tend to agree with what, Mr. John Bolton has said, that Trump has literally surrendered everything, meaning he calls himself the master of the art of the deal. But I think he has literally thrown Mr. Zelensky under the bus. When he reads out from the Russian, talking points, saying that he's a dictator, he's not held elections, his popularity is very low. In fact, Mr. Zelensky's popularity at 57% is higher than the popularity of Mr. Trump himself. And, there is a martial law, as you said very correctly, and I would like to compliment you on your initial report. I think it's a very accurate report that you have given. He calls him a dictator. He calls that it was Ukraine that started the war. That is, these are, I would like to use a stronger word, but I'll say that, these are gross inaccuracies. So I think rather than negotiating strongly for a fair deal, he has thrown in all the cards, first of all, by not inviting Ukraine to the negotiating table where talks were held, and secondly, completely agreeing with what Russia has said, what Putin has said, meaning fine, they hold 20% of Ukraine, of the territory, but there is also some territory that is held by Ukraine in Kursk, in the Russian Federation itself. There could have been, and everyone has been talking about the inviolability of the UN principles and UN Charter about the sovereignty of nations. So I think negotiations demanded that it should have been a tough negotiation, definitely with Ukraine at the table, and not given in like this, saying that, if you right at the beginning, you accede that Russia has all the cards, then you are not going to go very far. Sumita.
Absolutely, Mr. Sajanar, and thank you for your compliments for our report. It was done by a very able production team, so kudos to them for managing that report. But let me take that question to you, Mr. Joshi. Now, John Bolton's comments that Trump has effectively surrendered to Putin, of course, Mr. Sajanar is in agreement with what he had to say. But from your point of view, what's in it for the United States when Donald Trump is making these kind of statements?
I personally think that Ukraine is only part of a larger agenda of Donald Trump. Meaning, if you look at the Riyadh talks were not just about Ukraine. They were about bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia. And Ukraine forms only a part. So what I'm looking at is actually undoing a lot of US policy. And we are talking not just of détente, we are talking of entente, meaning that the turning United States policy inside out. So the point I'm trying to get at is that Ukraine forms only a part of that. And railroading Europe, meaning to Europe, the signals have been very clear. Mr. J.D. Vance has attacked the Europeans for not allowing the far-right parties, democratic rights, meaning it's an astonishing kind of a claim. On top of that, the Russians have demanded that this is in the Riyadh talks, the Russians demanded that the NATO pull out of Eastern Europe. So you can see that the way the Russians are looking at it is that given the advantage that Mr. Trump has given them already, meaning he has already put out the negotiating terms, he has already disclosed the negotiating terms. The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made it very clear that US will not support a security guarantee for Ukraine, and that Ukraine has to be prepared to lose some of its territory. I think that has been very clear. But the point is, the Russians want more.
Right.
They want to finish off Ukraine. That was their original agenda.
Right, right, Mr. Joshi. And let me come to Mr. Vikri for your opening comments. Of course, these gentlemen state that this is what Donald Trump has been doing and the kind of statements that he's been making. It's undoing a lot of U.S. foreign policy. And of course, that is quite visible from the kind of comments that he's made. In fact, he said that Zelensky better move fast or he won't have a country left. And then recently, Donald Trump stated that Russia wants to see the war end. Russia wants peace and they have the cards. But what, in your opinion, does Russia really have the cards to end this war?
Well, thanks very much for having me, and I would second the remarks of the ambassador and congratulate you on a very good summary. After the press conference with Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, I was somewhat encouraged by the emphasis on bringing about peace and even reining in a nuclear threat. But what has happened here is, it seems to me that President Trump has completely disregarded the lessons of World War II. One of those lessons is that appeasement does not work. Neville Chamberlain tried that in 1938, went to Munich, came back after a meeting with Hitler and said, "We have peace for our time." Less or about a year later, World War II started. President Trump is also rejecting, as you have indicated, the post-World War II institutions designed to bring peace and prosperity, not just to Europe through NATO, but through the world and through the United Nations. And I would hasten to add that I think India has a stake here. India was a strong supporter from the very first of the international institutions of the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and even now the WTO. President Trump has disregarded the principles of the United Nations about non-invasion of another country. He seems to have just disregarded in favor of a transactional bilateral approach that somehow great powers can get together and decide things, and that's the way the world will work. India has a strong adherence to democracy, rule of law, human rights, and has, while not necessarily taking all the steps that some might have liked to see, has stood up for it over the years. The Trump actions are completely contrary to that. So it's a very grave situation.
Right.
I would hesitate to add, of course, that Trump does
Right.
not speak for all Americans.
Right. Okay, so Trump does not really speak for all Americans, and you're suggesting that he might just be playing to the gallery, of course, his supporters who've helped him come to power. But let me ask you, Mr. Sajjanar, how is the sentiment then evolving towards Ukraine, and what does Kiev have to offer in this negotiation? As Trump has mentioned over and over again, he's given a clean sheet to Russia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, number one, what Mr. Trump has done is he has turned the US foreign policy not only on Ukraine, but I think across over the last, after the Second World War, over the last 80 years, he has literally turned it on its head. He has really moved it 180 degrees rather than confronting, a stronger power, attacking a weaker power and occupying it. Rather than doing that, he is supporting what this stronger power has done, basically saying because...
But Ambassador,
yeah,
agreed,
please.
Ambassador. Agreed, Ambassador. But my question is, how is all of that changing the sentiment towards Ukraine? How is the sentiment towards Ukraine evolving? And what does Kiev or Zelensky have to offer in this peace deal whenever that starts?
Okay, Sumita, Ukraine has very few cards in its hands because it was really, surviving on the basis of weaponry and equipment that it was getting from the United States and from Europe. Now, if United States, as Mr. Trump has said, that is going to sort of, close the tap as far as funding is concerned, arms equipment is concerned. Now, Mr. Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he has said, that he's a Democrat, he's a democratically elected leader, etc., etc. But, the Europeans can go only that far, and they are having the problems themselves. We have the elections in Germany happening just now. In other countries, the price of energy is rising. Their possibilities are very limited. So you see, in the short term, what I would say is that Ukraine and the European powers, they have very little agency. They have very little possibilities, very little flexibility to be able to do anything. But of course, the message has gone to them now that they cannot rely on America. They have to rely on themselves. They will have to start looking inwards. That is what they have been talking for some time, but it is going to take some time. But the short term is extremely bleak for President Zelensky, for Ukraine, and also for Europe, because this is just 1 month of Mr. Trump. What he is going to, and he's really, if I could use that expression, he's
Right.
come like a bull in a china shop. And what the next 3 years and 11 months are going to bring, I think people
Right.
can only speculate. Sumita.
Right, Ambassador. Absolutely, Ambassador. So his stance seemed to be very one-sided, and which is where there is a need for an international organization and agencies to come together so that a fair deal could be arrived at. Let me ask you, Mr. Joshi, now, he's been seen parroting the Russian propaganda, as many have said. He's falsely accused Ukraine of falsely starting the war. But how does this recent statement now impact Ukraine's ability to reclaim its territorial integrity and ensure that a fair balance is maintained in negotiations? Can that ever be achieved with respect to the statements that he's made, the statement about Russia having the control to sort of, arrive at any sort of negotiations?
I don't think so, not at this stage. Certainly not at this stage. Already the Russians are occupying 20% of Ukraine. They occupy the Crimean Peninsula. And Mr. Zelensky had long said that he wants, the Ukrainian war aim is to recover all the territories. But the point is, it cannot be done minus the United States. And I'm not so sure it could have been done even earlier, because the war is essentially right now stalemated. And if anything, it is the Russians who are having incremental success. The Russians are advancing incrementally. The Ukrainians are not being able to stop them. And at this stage where America has virtually turned an adversary of Ukraine, I don't think the Europeans have the wherewithal of backing Ukraine to the point where it can recover any territory, leave alone recover. The whole point is it may lose more territory. It may even lose the war. If this goes on the way it is, if Mr. Trump is aiding Putin's aims, there is every possibility that Ukraine loses the war. And I think that's exactly what Trump has been saying in so many words, that he is acting like a dictator and he may lose all of Ukraine. So the point right now, as Mr. Sajanar said, the situation is extremely bleak. The Europeans will have to think out of the box, but they've got to think fast. They simply cannot. They had one emergency meeting, and I think President Macron had called for yet another emergency meeting. But they may have to actually put boots on the ground in Ukraine, as suggested by the British Prime Minister.
Right. 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 So, Mr. Vikri, what can the European leaders do now? How can they put more pressure on Trump and, of course, Putin, given that they've been largely defensive, largely because of being left out? But what more can they do?
Well, the first thing they need to do is to get more unity among themselves, and these meetings are designed to do that. These are great democracies. France, UK, Germany, they do have resources. They have not armed and put as much into defense as perhaps we'd like, but for pretty good reason. After World War II, there was a step back from militarism. Trying to put resources into domestic prosperity and building these democracies. And we aided in that. We said, we'll give you the umbrella to allow you to do that, to put your resources into other areas other than guns and weapons and bombs and means to kill people. Now they're going to have to recalibrate, and they're going to have to put more into defense. Unfortunately, in the past, Europe has been the nest, if you will, of conflict and the origin of two world wars. So it's a very dicey business when you're asking Germany to rearm and when they have the history that they do, and hopefully they can pull that together. I do have somewhat optimism that the years of NATO and cooperation through the EU and other mechanisms will enable them to do that. I want to emphasize, though, that this is not just a European problem. This is a problem for India. This is a problem for great democracies. What do you think China is thinking about right now after seeing the way Trump has thrown Ukraine under the bus? What they're thinking, of course, is, look, we can do the same sort of thing in our neck of the woods, and they aren't going to stop just with Taiwan. They claim aeronautical products. They claim vast swaths of Indian territory. Right. If you throw under the bus not just Ukraine, but the principles of non-invasion and respect for borders, that has implications for India and worldwide.
Absolutely. Mr. Vikri, right. Mr. Vikri, definitely the outcome of how a peace deal is arrived at will have implications for other democracies as well. But Ambassador Sajjanar, let's talk about the economic sanctions bit of the problem. How do those fit into this dynamic? And if Russia controls more territory, does it give it a stronger hand in weathering international sanctions? And how does that then shift the balance of power?
You know, what Mr. Trump is trying to do is that he is, entering into this peace deal so that, there is an agreement. And after that, of course, Russia is looking forward to that the sanctions will come off. It's not that the sanctions are going to stay as they are. In any case, I think even if the sanctions were to stay, and I don't think that is going to be the case, because Russia has said it very categorically that we are now looking at normalization of our relations with the United States. I think just one meeting has given them so much of confidence that Mr. Trump is on their side. And they said that Mr. Putin is looking forward to a meeting with Mr. Trump, but of course we have to prepare well for it. So you see, it is all going to be business as usual, back to early February 22, as if the war had not started between the United States and Russia. It is only Europe and Ukraine. And let me also mention, I fully agree with Mr. Vikri that, this is what is the message that is going to China. That, if after 3 years, NATO and all who are at the doorstep could not stop Russia from taking this territory in Ukraine, America and all the others are so far away. How will they be able to stop us from taking Taiwan? Second point, the same there. The reliability of the United States, the influence of the United States globally, worldwide, is going to come down. And all countries around the world, they are going to hedge their bets. whether it is ASEAN, Southeast Asia, whether it is Africa, Latin America. We've already seen Mr. Trump is fighting with everyone. Even, he's fighting more with his allies and he's cozying up to his adversaries. So all those allies are going to say, okay, we cannot depend on Trump. So whom do we depend upon? They are going to move towards China. In any case, China is their biggest trade and investment partner. Sumita.
Correct. Ambassador Sajjanar, very, very valid points that all three of you have made. Mr. Joshi, Ambassador Sajjanar and Mr. Vikri, thank you very much for joining us this evening on India Tonight and sharing your perspectives and views on what these recent developments mean, not just for the United States, Russia and Ukraine, but these are going to have far-ranging implications and ramifications on other countries and democracies, and most importantly, a clear message going out to aggressors as well. So in the interest of world peace, this peace deal needs to be fair and equal. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap on this edition of India Tonight. Hope you liked watching the show as much as we did putting it together for you. From me and the entire team, goodbye and thank you very much for staying with us.